What other forms of capital, let's say you're a later stage company, maybe you don't want equity, what are your options, but still maybe not bankable? What are your options?
I think that's a great question, because we tend, I think, to think about equity and bank debt. Really, equity is here and bank debt is here, and there's a whole lot of sources in between that can provide capital and just require a different level of return, and they're a different kind of company. For one, there's asset-based lenders. So these would be typically privately owned, privately financed lenders that are lending against assets of the company, sometimes lending against purchase orders, helping to fill funding gaps. Access Business Finance out of Bellevue, Advanced Capital out of Seattle, Sunstone Business Finance in Portland, Sterling Financial, not related to Sterling Bank, but that's one that has an office, or a guy who works out of Bend, actually. Those companies are going to look for an all-asset lien on the company's assets, are going to charge between 15 and 25% interest and fees, sometimes a little higher if it's more of a factoring deal. But if you think of that kind of financing as transitional, something that would be used for 6 months or a year, it fills a gap. And then the newest thing, kind of a new twist on financing, is called revenue loans. And the revenue loan is a concept that's been around a long time. It was used in the motion picture industry and a few other things, where somebody basically gives a borrower or gives a company some money and says, you pay me back on a flexible schedule that will be, the timing will be determined by your future revenue growth or your future revenue. So the companies that are doing that, there's one in Portland called, I think, Revenue Capital Management, and one in Seattle called Lighter Capital, a revenue loan. And revenue loans concept is this: if you're a company that has revenue over $1 million and you're a high gross margin business, so you can afford to give up some of that revenue, I'm going to give you, let's say, $1,000 today, and over the next X years, you're going to give me back $3,000. And you'll pay me back that $3,000 by essentially a royalty. You'll strip off a little piece of your top line, and every month you send me a check until I've received 2x or 3x the initial loan, or the initial capital. I'm not sure it's a loan or not. If you do the math, that's fairly expensive, depending on how long it takes. But it's a non-equity money, and it's non-covenanted money, and typically non-guaranteed. So it is risk capital.
It actually looks better on your balance sheet, right? Because it's treated by, it subordinates to the bank debt or any other debt, and it actually, I think, actually shows up as, or banks think of it as really equity. Jim, were you going to comment?
No, I mean, I already explained what the concept is, and certainly much more flexibility in the revenue loan concept. You know, and as Art said, appropriate for companies that have sales, have decent margins, and want the growth capital, but aren't bankable yet in a normal inventory and receivables kind of sense. And there's mezzanine debt, which is sort of a high yield, or basically it's a version of the asset-based lending that Art was talking about, without necessarily having asset-based. There are private individuals who will do these things, or syndicates get formed. So to any extent that the business has cash flow, there are lots of different ways to slice the cash flow to create an attractive investment vehicle, depending upon what the goals of the company are and what the goals of the investor group are. Again, it goes back to matching what the company's goals are, how long it needs the capital, and how it wants to pay it back eventually. Are you a lifestyle business, or do you think you're going to sell the business in 3 years? Very, very different kinds of setups for a potential investor as to how he or she gets paid back. So,
if there's anybody here that's part of the legislature or part of the Oregon State University, this area needs a computer science major. You know, if there's one talent, that skill set that is in massive demand right now, it's software development, web developers. And they're being you can't hire them down in the valley, and so the local companies here, they quickly run out of that talent. They've hired everybody locally, and so then they stall, and so if we're not organically producing our own, then we're gonna basically stall. So we got to do that. And then you need local investors, you know, and ideally enough of an organized sort of local investor community that the outside investors who would invest, they can invest knowing that there's a smart local investor that's also in the deal and can be sort of the feet on the street. But I think that the other thing, which again, to kind of plug some activity that Jim Coonan and Jim Bodecker are working on is an accelerator. And I think that that's really key, because an accelerator program is where you get all these, you have these series of sort of entrepreneur, boot camps essentially that are mentored by, a group of, experienced entrepreneurs. And ideally a lot of those mentors are both local as well as out of the area, and they're from specific industries. And now you're getting sort of, it's almost like a qualified deal sourcing mechanism for investors. So as investors become aware of that, and they see the companies and the quality of the teams that are popping out of these accelerator programs, that gives them even more confidence to want to take a look at those deals, and I think it starts to feed on itself.
Okay. And one just kind of brief thought, one kind of final pearl of wisdom. If there was one thing somebody should walk away from a discussion who's have a startup firm, what is that thing that perhaps we haven't talked about?
The thing I would focus on is how to perfume the pig, or how, for you, it's your livelihood, it's your idea, it's your strategy, it's what you want to accomplish. But to the outsiders, it's a pig, and because maybe it doesn't have cash flow, it doesn't have a lot of attractiveness to it. There were some great comments here about reaching out to this, to the networks, to the sponsors, and all the things going on here. The more you can interact with people who have done it, the better off you're going to be in crafting your story. Because ultimately, the models, the business plan, none of that really matters. I mean, it really does come down to conviction, willpower, and can you be trusted? And that's a very big takeaway from here, is leverage these networks to get to that place.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think if you can attract angel investors, they bring a lot more to the party than just the money. So when you're looking for capital, you need to also talk about what human capital that you need, because the more successful companies are the ones that have good mentoring. So if you can get somebody who's interested in your business and can bring a skill, or can bring other investors, or can network you, your odds of success go way up. So, and I've taken it off that one slide, but the last thing you would want, from my opinion, is a silent investor. You ought to pick these people because they can help you increase your odds of success. So, please.
Jim, thanks for moderating on such short notice. Did a great job. Thank you, panelists. We really appreciate your presentation and your participation. It was very, very interesting. And that concludes this inaugural Business 2020 Executive Seminar, and look for the next one. Should be soon. Thanks.